Hi, my name is Chris O'Hara, and I'm a parishioner here at Christ the King Parish for the last few years. And I just want to share with you a passage that I turn to often that gives me hope. This is from Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8, verses 15 through 17. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of sonship. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is the Spirit Himself bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with Him in order that we may also be glorified with Him. I like this passage in particular because it reminds me of what I am at the very core of my identity. That's a child of a Father who loves me. And I think this is really easy to forget. For me, I'm often tempted to think more in that first spirit, the spirit of slavery. Not necessarily that I'm a slave of God, but that He can seem distant, He can seem far away. And instead of thinking of my relationship with Him as a father and a child, it's easy to slip into thinking of my relationship with Him as like a slave and a master, or an employee and a worker. And those are totally different kinds of relationships. With God as a slave driver or an employer, well, if I'm not doing so well and I'm not, up to snuff or performing well, I get discarded or fired or let go. But when I remember that God is my Father, I remember that my relationship is one of unconditional love and family trust and assurance of membership in the family, no matter what. There's no getting rid of me. Family is forever. Uh, in the world today, things are really difficult. The world is a tough place, and there's a lot of tragedy and suffering in the world. Well, if my lens is thinking of God as a slave master or an employer, it would be easy to think, well, God must not love me, or has discarded me, or wants to get rid of me, or I'm not good enough that I deserve all this suffering. But I remember that God is a Father who loves me, and despite all the suffering in the world, I'm still a child of a Father who loves me and wants my good, no matter what, at all times. It's normal that people are going to experience suffering. Even Jesus, who was perfect, whose love between him and the Father was perfect, experienced a little bit of suffering. Actually, he experienced a lot of suffering. That doesn't mean the Father didn't love him. That doesn't mean the Father abandoned him. But it was something that he had to endure to be glorified and to be faithful to the Father. So if even Jesus, who's the perfect child of the Father, can undergo some suffering, then maybe I can unite my suffering to him too. Because the passage goes on to say that if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. So if I'm a child of God just like Jesus, then I will inherit through him everything that God wants him to inherit: divine life, participation in the heavenly life, experience of God's love in my heart, and joy and peace, even in the midst of suffering and tragedy and even this global pandemic, which is something totally new that we've never experienced before. So I turn back to this passage because I know that the Spirit reminds me that I'm a child of God and reminds me that God is a Father who will always take care of me, even in the midst of suffering and tragedy and difficult times, that I'm a fellow heir with Christ of his love and his life, and will spend eternity with him in heaven.